Happy Hanukkah, and I hope you're all doing well over the festive period. Um, I find it funny sometimes seeing Hanukkah messages from people who are often very critical of Israel because they don't seem to have clocked that Hanukkah is celebrating the re-establishment of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel against a foreign colonial enemy. It's rather ironic, given that they can then be quite critical of Israel and not appreciate the connection. But it's also been quite interesting to see how the Israel obsession has even found its way to filter into Christmas messages. And this is Bear Grylls, who I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. He's a TV personality and adventurer. And he put out this message. I'll just show you the start of it. Hold on.
It is Christmas Eve, always such a special time, but I wanted to read a little bit from the greatest story ever told. This bit of the story is set in a place in Palestine, first century Palestine, called Bethlehem. And this is first person, this part of the story, from a young, scared, poor young girl called Mariam. And this is part of her story.
Now, I'd like to you can watch the full thing on X, but he says, let me tell you the story. This is obviously about Jesus. It's about a Middle Eastern refugee. So it's about a refugee. And there's a short extract near the beginning of the adventure when Mariam, a young, poor, and no doubt terrified girl, in Palestine, gives birth in a rundown animal pen to a baby who was foretold for hundreds of years. Well, let's just say the reaction has been just what's needed. So, Campaign Against Anti-Semitism wrote, "Hi Bear Grylls, a quick historical note. Mary, was actually a Jewish woman from Judea under Roman rule." Okay, Mariam is trying to sound like it's the Arabic version of Miriam, but she would have been referred to as Miriam. Mary, I think, is the kind of European translation of the word, but it would have been her Hebrew name. And Mariam is putting an Arabic spin on her name. But Arabs didn't live in the land until the 7th century when they conquered it. There was an Islamic conquest. Jews have been living there for hundreds of years prior. And then he refers to the region as Palestine. But it wasn't called that until 100 years later when the Judeans, the Jews, which Mary was one of, were exiled and Emperor Hadrian renamed it Syria Palestina after the Bar Kokhba revolt to try to sever the Jewish connection to the land. A lot of people over the millennia since have believed his propaganda. Ironically, they refer to Zionism, the Jews returning to the land, as being these white European colonialists. Well, actually, it was Hadrian, the Roman emperor, in his renaming of the land Palestine. And this move to change the name was a white European colonialist move. How ironic. And then they wrote, while Mary's family fled to Egypt to escape King Herod's persecution, calling her a Palestinian refugee not only imposes modern terminology on ancient history, but it completely eradicates her Jewish identity. It's historical nonsense with an obvious agenda. And if you want to honour her story, tell it properly. Zach Goldsmith, a former British Foreign Office Minister for the International Environment, Climate, Forests, Oceans in the Lords, House of Lords, he said about Bear Grylls, he thought he was being edgy, but it's so stupid, even stupid people are wincing. Take stupid to a whole new level. And there was so much pressure on Bear Grylls, or so much anger and upset at this video, which is a great sign, by the way, that Bear Grylls felt he had to issue a response. So he said, just as a way of response to all the arguments going on here about the area of the world Mary lived in, I referred to this area as Palestine as per the maps you will find in most Bibles. Scholars will always go back and forward debating the technicality of exact dates that various regions became known by their names. But in this case, I'm simply setting the scene for the greatest story ever told. Yeah. He refers to Miriam as Mariam rather than the Hebrew name, calls her a refugee, refers to it as Palestine when they were Jews from Judea. I'm sure it was just, he's using all the far left progressive terminology as ways of virtue signaling and trying to, give a wink and a nod to the anti-Israel cause, and now he's trying to somehow deny it. At least we're seeing now, at least this is showing that the pushback is starting to work. It's starting to have an effect. Remarkable that he thought he would, please most people in the culture by saying this message. The fact that he's had to write this response shows that our pushback in telling and insisting on the truth is working. He said, "I referred to Palestine as the general area that Mary lived in. I'm not referring to her nationality or ethnicity. She was clearly Jewish. But he refers to her as Maryam, which is Arabic." In response to whether Jesus was a refugee, yes, he was. Mary, Joseph, and Jesus were forced to flee their homeland to live as refugees in the Egyptian desert. They were escaping Herod's decree to kill all the young male babies in Bethlehem. They returned finally 4 or so years later to their homeland and to Nazareth. Also, I would note that in his video, he referred to Bethlehem in the Arabic translation. Again, Arabs weren't living there. If he wants to use the right translation, the way that Mary and Joseph would have referred to that area, he would have called it Beit Lehem. But he uses the Arabic version instead. Anyway, Arsen Ostrovsky wrote, "Why don't you just admit you were wrong? You got caught and do the decent thing and apologise." Seth Fransman said, "So you admit he wasn't actually a refugee. For 2,000 years, this story was told without forcing it into this warped lens where the people become Middle Eastern refugees. They weren't refugees, they were living in their land. It's obvious why the term refugee was forced into the story, because today it's fashionable to be a refugee, and so now that term is pushed in." It's great that we're seeing this pushback, that he had to write this response, but because it shows that people aren't buying this agenda-driven nonsense. We just want the unadulterated truth now, and that's why I've been saying that JTV is all about telling the truth in an uncompromised way. Well, we had another Christmas message from our favourite leprechaun, the President of Ireland, who, what was his message this year? Well, let's have a look again. It seems to be that the Jews are just on everyone's mind.
This Christmas, we are all too aware that far too many of our global family are having inflicted upon them as part of the most horrific circumstances of war. Circumstances that less and less respect civilian rights and that force endless displacement. At the end of this year, we think of all those who will be recalling all of these horrific events of recent times.
I wonder who he's referring to. I'll give you one guess.
Brutal attacks on civilians, including the taking of hostages for whom so many families continue to anxious.
The nice little kind of just token messaging of the hostages as well before he goes to attack Israel for trying to deal with the real genociders of Hamas.
We await word of their safety, and as I speak, so many deaths of the most vulnerable remind us of what was released by way of a response. A response that has transcended all of the boundaries of humanitarian law. Given all of these circumstances, the painful lessons of history and our hopes for the future must surely persuade us to strive with urgency for a world where diplomacy triumphs over endless preparation for war, where the pursuit of peace is a shared objective with far greater resonance than is present at the moment in the discourse, where we might speak of peace in a diverse world where the safety and dignity of every human being is valued. This is now our best hope and preparation for responsible and sustainable lives together on what is our vulnerable shared planet.
Yeah, I think we all know the second you mention hostages, we know exactly what you're talking about. And then when he talks about over-the-top response, he's obviously talking about Israel. Let's just be clear that this is the same Irish government that has just said to the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, that we need to expand the definition of genocide. Because what's happened? They've seen that Israel, in her totally legitimate and dutiful obligation to go after Hamas, they have had less civilian casualties, a lower ratio of combatant to non-combatant in the history of urban warfare. So it's become very clear to them that there is not a genocide. 2/3 of Europe's Jews were wiped out in the Holocaust. That's a genocide. Gaza's population has increased by 60,000. There's 40,000 deaths. It seems like almost 1 in 2 were Hamas from this war. War is obviously terrible and bloody, but Israel's precision has been unmatched. The Battle of Mosul, which America fought in fighting ISIS, the combatant to non-combatant ratio was between 1 to 9 to 1 to 13. So there is no criticism you can have this. So they now say, okay, well, let's expand the definition of genocide, meaning they can see Israel's not committing a genocide. So they want to expand the definition. The only objective here can be to stop Israel, undermine Israel's efforts to get rid of the real genociders. And frankly, it makes him and the Irish government who are supporting this complicit, ironically, in genocide themselves, because they're undermining Israel's ability to go after Hamas, who wish to genocide their entire population. And he talks about peace and dignity of human life. He's undermining an entire nation's ability to protect their own lives and security. The Jewish people taught the world the value of human peace as an ideal and human dignity of each individual. We're not going to be lectured by the Irish president. By the way, Ireland doesn't exactly have the most wonderful history ever of upholding human rights and certainly Jewish rights. But as Neo Berg says, why is the President of Ireland rambling about the Gaza war in a Christmas speech? Did he ever do this about other conflicts? Also, is this what Irish people want to listen to as they get ready for what is supposed to be a festive and joyous holiday? Exactly. Has he spoken about the many, many more hundreds of thousands of deaths that have occurred in the Yemen civil war? Does he want to talk about Assad and the 50,000 people that we found that were being imprisoned and tortured by Assad? Does he want to talk about that? That's very recent and topical. The Uyghurs being held in China in modern concentration camps. Does he want to talk about the conflict and hundreds of thousands killed in Sudan or Ethiopia? No. But on Christmas Day, he chooses to talk about and demonize and undermine the Jewish people, simply living, doing what they need to do to survive, to live. Anti-Semitism can really make you go crazy. It really can. And speaking of craziness and ahistorical narratives, Irish Unity, which is the official Twitter account for Million Voices for Irish Unity, it's an Irish nationalist page, did a similar thing to what we saw with Bear Grylls, and it's posted this picture saying if Mary and Joseph set off to Bethlehem today, they'd cross 15 Israeli checkpoints and a 30-foot wall. And as Andrew Neil, the great British broadcaster, said, Mary and Joseph were Jews. Bethlehem is controlled by the Palestinian Authority, so there'd be no point in them setting off. The PLA wouldn't let them in, you numpties. It is simply brilliant. The level to which people will just try to twist the facts in order to fit their narrative. But you know what's great? You know what I think the big takeaway is from this story? Is that we're seeing the truth is coming to light. And not just that it's coming to light, but people are starting to see that it's not even worth it from a selfish perspective to try and pander to the lies and the nonsense. It's absolutely remarkable. Slowly we are seeing, through natural means, people are starting to wake up to the truth. This is a very, very good thing. And that's why we have to keep doing what we're doing in spreading the truth and sharing it in a world that has been truth deprived. If you appreciate what we're doing at JTV to share the truth about Israel and create positive associations with the Jewish people and Judaism, I want to tell you something. We are reaching millions every single week across the world, non-Jews and Jews alike. And we have a plan to grow the channel, to accelerate our growth with more presenters and documentaries. And we've launched a campaign in order to make this possible. Have a watch. The world is full of lies.
That Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu bear criminal responsibility.
The truth is under attack.
Which river, which sea? So you don't know the answer.
From the media to the UN to celebrities, lies reign supreme. But the thing about the truth is that no matter how dark a room of lies, if you light one candle of truth, it can light up the whole room. That's why I created JTV, the global Jewish YouTube channel. We have been lighting the flame of truth on social media. We believe that the key to defeating anti-Semitism isn't just in fighting the hate, but it's about creating pro-Semitism and sharing the truth. There's nothing inevitable about anti-Semitism. We just need to tell our story with confidence pride, and love. We believe that telling the truth, exposing the lies, and sharing the wisdom and beauty found within the Jewish story and the ideas of Judaism can transform the world. We're reaching millions of people all around the world from all backgrounds and perspectives. Every day we are transforming people's views about Israel, Jews, and Judaism. How do we know? Because they tell us. But there's so much more we can do. It's time for us to build a team to accelerate our growth and produce way more content that can appeal to even more people. We want to hire more presenters, start doing documentary series, and way more. And if we do that, JTV will start competing with the other big media players who peddle anti-Israel narratives. And that's where you come in. I'm asking you to please partner with us on our journey to spread the truth to the entire world by donating whatever you can to this fundraiser. Together, we will harness the power of social media to shine the light of truth to the whole world. Thank you so much for your support.